There's a specific sound a life makes when it begins to fall apart. Most people miss it. It isn't loud, it isn't dramatic. It's the sound of something you trusted shifting 1 degree out of place. A phone call that comes at the wrong hour. A silence at dinner that wasn't there last week. A number on a screen that doesn't match what you believed about yourself yesterday. That's the first crack. And if you're honest with me right now, if you're really honest, you know the exact moment you heard yours. My name is Joseph Murphy, and I'm going to speak to you the way I wish someone had spoken to me the year my external world came apart. No polish, no performance. Just the truth of what I learned when the ground I had spent decades standing on began to give way under my feet. Let me tell you how it started for me. It was an ordinary Tuesday. That's what gets you, the ordinariness. You expect catastrophe to arrive with thunder. It doesn't. It arrives in a routine email, in a casual sentence from your spouse, in a lab result folded into a white envelope. For me, it was a meeting I thought was going to be about a promotion. It wasn't. I walked into that room a man who believed he knew his life, and I walked out a man who no longer recognized the hallway I'd walked through 1,000 times before. Something you need to understand about the way fracture works. It doesn't announce itself. It seeps. It shows up first in your body, before your mind has agreed to know it. A tightness in the chest that won't explain itself. A dream you can't remember but that leaves you exhausted. The inability to taste the coffee you've drunk every morning for 15 years. The body knows before the mind allows. And here's what I've come to believe. After sitting with thousands of men and women at the worst threshold of their lives, the fracture of your external environment is not the tragedy you think it is. It is an invitation. A brutal, unwelcome, uninvited, nearly unbearable invitation, but an invitation nonetheless. An invitation to meet the part of yourself you have been avoiding your entire life. Ask yourself something right now before we go any further. When was the last time you knew yourself apart from your circumstances? Not the version of you that's a father, a mother, a manager, a wife, a provider, a professional. That you, the one underneath, the one who was there before you had any of the things you now fear losing. Do you remember that person? Can you find them? Most people can't. Because most people have spent so many years attaching their identity to what surrounds them, that when what surrounds them begins to fracture, they experience it as a death. And in a way it is. A certain kind of self dies when the external world comes apart. But I want you to hear me, and I want you to hear me clean. The self that dies in that fracture is not the self that was meant to carry you forward. It was the scaffolding, not the building. And the confusion between the two is the confusion that has caused more quiet suffering in men and women over 35 than any other mistake I know. I wasted years of my life believing I was my job title. I wasted years of my marriage believing I was what I provided. I wasted years of my fathering believing I was what I made my children proud of. And when each of those scaffolds shook, I shook with them, because I had never made the distinction between what I had and who I am. Nobody taught me that. Nobody taught you that either. We were handed a script and told to perform it well and assume the performance was the person. Then the fracture comes. And in the fracture, something remarkable begins to happen if you're paying attention. You begin to notice that there is a part of you that is watching the collapse. A part of you that is not collapsing. A part of you that is still here, still aware, still present, even as the walls of your life are giving way. That part of you has a name. I call it the observer. And learning to locate the observer, learning to trust it, learning to rest in it, Learning to be led by it is the single most important spiritual and practical discipline I have ever encountered. This is what I'm going to share with you over the next hour or so. I'm going to share what I call the Observer Protocol. It's not a philosophy. It's a way of standing inside your own life when the external environment begins to give way. It's what I used when my world fell apart. It's what I've watched countless others use to find their footing when they believed footing was no longer possible. You didn't come to this by accident. You opened this because something in you is cracking, or has cracked, or is afraid of cracking, and I'm not going to pretend with you. I'm not going to offer you the comfortable lies. I'm going to offer you something better. The company of a man who has stood where you're standing, and who came through, and who wants to walk with you now. So breathe. Whatever you're carrying, set it down for just a moment. The fracture is real. I'm not going to tell you it isn't. But there is something older and steadier inside of you than whatever is breaking. And before we're done, you're going to remember its name. Let me tell you about the biggest lie I ever believed, because that lie is the foundation of everything we're going to unlearn together. For 32 years of my life, I believed something that was never true. And the terrifying part is, I didn't know it wasn't true until the evidence of its falseness was standing in my living room, looking me in the eyes, telling me that everything I had built on top of it was about to come down. The lie was this, that the external world, if built carefully enough, becomes stable. That if you earn the right degree, marry the right person, save the right amount, choose the right neighborhood, raise the right children, maintain the right reputation, then you have built yourself a life that will hold you. That's what we were told. That's what our parents, who worked themselves to exhaustion to give us better lives, genuinely believed. And so we inherited the lie, and we worked ourselves to exhaustion protecting it, and we passed it down to our children like it was wisdom. Let me tell you what stability actually is. Stability is a feeling. It is not a fact. It is a subjective experience that arises when your external circumstances happen for a period of time to align with your expectations. That alignment is temporary. It has always been temporary. It will always be temporary. Every generation before you has watched it shift. You are not special. I am not special. The illusion of stable ground is one of the most widespread and most destructive illusions in modern life, because when it breaks, and it always breaks, the person who believed in it doesn't just lose circumstances. They lose the meaning they had attached to those circumstances. And the loss of meaning is what kills people, not the loss of money, not the loss of status, the loss of meaning. Here's what happened to me. I had built a company. 13 years of my life poured into it. Every weekend, every holiday, every dinner I missed, every soccer game I watched on a phone screen in an airport. I did it because I believed I was building something that would stand, a monument to my discipline, a proof to the world and to myself that I had figured out how to be a man who wins. The company was my religion. The company was my identity. The company was my evidence. Then one phone call from a regulatory agency I barely understood. One chain of decisions made by people I would never meet in a room I would never enter. And in 6 months, what had taken 13 years to build was on the auction floor. Not because of something I did wrong, because of something that shifted in the world around me. The ground I had trusted moved, and I had not known that the ground could move. What I want you to hear is this. I was one of the lucky ones, because my ground moved fast. A lot of people's grounds move slowly. They spend 20 years inside a marriage that has quietly become a performance. They spend 30 years inside a career that is draining the life out of them, one afternoon at a time. They spend 40 years inside a body they have never listened to because they were too busy maintaining the external scaffolding of who they were supposed to be. And then the ground moves all at once. A diagnosis, a divorce, a dismissal, and it feels like an earthquake, but it wasn't. It was the culmination of tremors they had been ignoring for decades. If you are listening to me right now and something in your chest just tightened, I want you to stay with that tightness. Don't push it away. That tightness is your observer trying to speak to you. That tightness is the part of you that has been keeping the score the whole time, even while the rest of you was performing. It's the part of you that knows which marriage is real and which one is a pageant, which work is alive and which is slowly killing you, which friendships nourish you and which drain you dry. Your observer knows. It has always known. The lie of the stable ground teaches you to ignore your observer, because the observer tells you truths that would require you to change. And change is the one thing the external world's machinery is organized to prevent. Everything around you, your bank, your employer, your social circle, the advertisements you scroll past, the news you consume, everything is calibrated to keep you producing, consuming, performing. None of it is calibrated to keep you awake. So we fall asleep. We fall asleep inside our own lives. And then something cracks. And we wake up and we're terrified because we have no idea who we are outside of the dream we were sleeping in. Here's something I learned in the aftermath of my own collapse, and it took me almost 2 years to learn it. Are you ready for it? The fracture is not happening to you. The fracture is happening for you. Every single time, without exception. I know that sounds insulting when you're inside the worst of it. I would have punched a man in the face for saying those words to me the week my company folded. But I am telling you now, as someone who has lived on both sides of it, the fracture is the universe's most honest gift. It is the only thing powerful enough to interrupt the performance you have been running for decades. It is the only thing that forces you to ask the question you have been avoiding. Who am I underneath all of this? Stop for a moment. Put your hand on your chest. Feel your heartbeat. That heartbeat was there before your job. It will be there if your job disappears. It was there before your marriage. It will be there even if the marriage changes shape. It was there before your house, your car, your bank account, your reputation. That heartbeat, that's the ground. That's always been the ground. Everything else was weather. And once you understand that, the whole protocol begins. Something happens in the middle of a collapse that most people never get taught to recognize. And because they don't recognize it, they miss the most important doorway of their entire lives. I want to name it for you now, so that when it happens, or if it's already happening, you don't miss it the way I almost missed mine. In the thick of my own unraveling, in a stretch of about 4 months where every piece of bad news I thought could come, did come, I noticed something strange. In the middle of all that pain, there was a part of me that was calm. I don't mean at peace. I don't mean numb. I mean genuinely, quietly, impossibly calm. And it wasn't my thinking mind, because my thinking mind was on fire. It wasn't my feeling body, because my feeling body was sick with grief. It was something else. Something behind those. Something watching. That something is what I've come to call the observer. And I want to tell you, with as much conviction as I have in me, the observer is the realest part of you. Not your thoughts, not your feelings, not your history, not your circumstances. The observer. The one who is reading these words right now. The one who notices what you know. The one who was present when you were 5 years old and is present now, unchanged, undiminished, waiting. Most of us go our entire lives without locating the observer, because the machinery of ordinary life keeps us tangled up in the thinking and the feeling. We identify with our thoughts. We identify with our emotions. We treat every passing storm as if it is the weather and the sky both. And so when a storm comes that's bigger than we can handle, We don't know that there is a sky behind it. We think we are the storm, and we drown. The first move of the observer protocol is the simplest and the hardest. It is this: you learn to separate the one who is experiencing from the one who is aware of the experiencing. That sounds philosophical. It's not. It's practical. It is the difference between life and death for a human being in crisis. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, whatever you're feeling, notice it. Put a word on it. Maybe it's a kind of tiredness. Maybe it's a low hum of anxiety. Maybe it's grief for something you haven't fully admitted you've lost. Whatever it is, name it. Now, here's the question that changes everything. Who just named it? Who noticed the feeling and put the word on it? That noticer is not the feeling. That noticer is the observer. And the observer cannot be touched by the feeling it observes. You have to let that land, because everything I'm going to teach you from this point forward rests on it. The observer is not damaged by the storm. The observer is not bankrupted by the bankruptcy. The observer is not divorced by the divorce. The observer is not diagnosed by the diagnosis. The observer is the one who witnesses the bankruptcy, the divorce, the diagnosis, and remains, and remains, and remains. I remember the exact day I met my own observer for the first time. It was the second week after I had signed the papers to surrender the company. I was sitting in a parking lot outside a coffee shop I used to go to with my business partner. I was crying, not from one thing, but from everything at once. And somewhere in the middle of that crying, I heard, and I don't mean heard with my ears, I mean heard in some other way, a voice that said simply, "You are still here." That was it. 4 words. You are still here. And I realized, sitting in that car, that the voice was right. The company was gone. The identity I had built around the company was gone. The future I had been planning for was gone. But the one hearing all of this, the one who was noticing the loss, was still here, had always been here, would always be here. That was the moment my life began again. Not the moment I rebuilt, not the moment things got better, the moment I stopped confusing myself with the wreckage around me. Now here is what I need you to understand about the observer, because there is a dangerous misunderstanding that happens here. Some people hear what I'm saying and they think I'm telling them to detach, to stop caring, to float above their lives like a spiritual tourist. I am not telling you that. Detachment is a defense. The observer is not a defense. The observer is a presence. You can be fully in your grief, fully in your fear, fully in your rage, and still be in touch with the observer that holds all of it. That is the goal. Not to escape your life, to finally be present inside it. When the observer awakens, you stop being a leaf in the wind. You become the tree. The wind still blows. The storms still come. The branches still shake. But something in you knows it is rooted, and that rootedness is not dependent on the weather. Here's the practice for the first stage of the protocol. 3 times a day for about 30 seconds each. I want you to stop whatever you're doing and ask yourself one question. Who is aware right now? Not what are you doing, not what are you feeling. Who is aware? Just that. 30 seconds, 3 times a day. It sounds like nothing. It is not nothing. It is the beginning of the most important conversation you will ever have. The conversation between the you that circumstances can touch and the you that they cannot. Once you have begun that conversation, the fracture begins to change shape. It stops being the enemy. It starts becoming the teacher. And the next thing you need to learn is what precisely the fracture is teaching you. Every collapse follows a pattern. Did you know that? Most people think their particular catastrophe is uniquely theirs, uniquely terrible, uniquely without precedent. I used to think that too. And then I spent 10 years sitting across from men and women whose lives had come apart, and I noticed something. The external wreckage looks different in each life, but the sequence of what breaks is almost always the same. Once you can see the sequence, you stop being terrified of it. You start reading it like a map. Here's what fractures first, in almost every case: identity. Before your job is gone, before your marriage ends, before the diagnosis comes, something in your sense of yourself has already begun to come loose. You just weren't paying attention. The man who loses his business on a Tuesday has usually been losing his relationship with himself for 3 years. The woman who walks out of her marriage has usually walked out of her inner life a decade before she walked out the door. The diagnosis comes after months, sometimes years, of a body trying to tell a mind something the mind wouldn't hear. The external fracture is almost always the last event in a chain that began internally. That's the first thing you need to know. The second thing you need to know is what fractures next, once identity has begun to come loose. Relationships. This is the cruel one. The people who were connected to the version of you that worked, they struggle when the version of you that worked is no longer available. Some of them rise. Most of them don't. Not because they're bad people, because they were loving a role you were playing, and the role is what's disappearing. You will lose friends in the fracture. I lost 11 the year my business collapsed. 11 people who 6 months before had been at my table. I'm not bitter about it anymore. I was for a long time, but I came to understand something. Those 11 people were never in my life. A character I was playing was in their lives. When the character left the stage, they had no reason to stay in the theater. What fractures third is the material, the money, the house, the assets, the things you counted. And here's where something strange happens, something I didn't expect. Once identity and relationships have already been shaken, the material fracture hurts less than you think it will. Not because money doesn't matter. It does, and I'm not going to insult you by pretending otherwise. But because by the time the material fractures, you have already begun to discover that your sense of self was never actually held up by the material. You just thought it was. And watching the money go teaches you, with a brutal honesty nothing else can, that you can survive its absence. Most people never learn this. Most people spend their whole lives hoarding a substance that was never the thing that held them up, and they die having mistaken the wrapping paper for the gift. What fractures forth is the body. And if you don't learn the lessons of the first 3 fractures, the body is what the universe uses to get your attention. I have watched this happen too many times to count. A man refuses to feel his grief, and 3 years later he has high blood pressure. A woman refuses to leave a draining friendship, and 2 years later she has a lump. I am not telling you that illness is caused by unlived feeling. That would be a cruel oversimplification. I am telling you that the body is the final bulletin board on which your life posts its messages. And if you have not been reading the earlier messages, the body will make sure you cannot ignore the last one. Listen to me carefully. The sequence, identity, relationships, material, body, is not a punishment. It is a mercy. It is life's way of giving you multiple chances to wake up. Most fractures begin with small tremors at the identity level, and if you will attend to those tremors, you never have to go through the rest. If you ignore them, life escalates. It does not do this to punish you. It does this because it is trying to reach you. Everything in your life is trying to reach you at all times. The question is whether you are willing to receive the message. Ask yourself, what has been trying to reach you? What has been trying to reach you for years, and you have been too busy, too afraid, too committed to the performance to receive it. A conversation you haven't had, a truth you haven't spoken, a grief you haven't let come up, a hope you abandoned so long ago you've forgotten its name. All of those are messages. All of those are knocks at your door. And if you do not answer them, I promise you, life will eventually knock harder. Here's the thing that most motivational speakers won't tell you. Not all fractures are bad news. Some of them are overdue news. Some of them are the body refusing to keep lying for the mind. Some of them are the soul refusing to keep performing for the ego. Some of them are God or the universe or whatever language you use, finally getting tired of being ignored. I have met many men and women who, years after the worst fracture of their lives, have told me the same sentence with variations. I am grateful it happened. I am grateful it happened, not because the pain was pleasant, because the pain was honest, and they had not been honest with themselves for a very, very long time. When you can look at your fracture, whatever kind it is, and read it as a message rather than a sentence, you have taken the second step of the protocol. You have moved from victim of circumstance to student of circumstance. That is an enormous shift. And it prepares you for what comes next, because what comes next is the hardest thing I am going to ask you to do. I am going to ask you to sit with yourself alone in the dark without any defense. There is a room each of us has to enter at some point if we are going to become the person the fracture is asking us to become. The room has no lights, no comfort, no music. Nobody is in it but you. And the door only opens at a specific hour, not physically 3 in the morning, but the hour that functions like it in a human life. The hour when the distractions are gone. The hour when the performance is impossible. The hour when you and you alone are left together with nothing between you. Most adults spend their entire lives avoiding this room. We fill our days with noise, work, kids, screens, errands, ambitions, appointments. Because as long as the days are full, we don't have to enter the room. But the fracture breaks our schedule. The fracture empties the day. The fracture makes the room unavoidable. And that is why the fracture, for all its terror, is the secret doorway. You cannot enter the room voluntarily. You can only be pushed into it. And the thing that pushes you is the collapse of whatever was keeping you out. Let me tell you about my room. It was a specific night, about 5 weeks after the company was gone. My wife was asleep upstairs. My son was away at college. I was sitting at the kitchen table with nothing in front of me. No papers, no phone, no drink, nothing. Just the table. And I realized in that moment that I had not sat with myself alone without something to do in probably 20 years. 20 years. Think about that. 2 decades of my one and only life, and I had not been willing to be in a room with myself. Not once. Not really. And the reason I had not been willing is because I was afraid of what I would find. I was afraid that if I stopped doing, there would be nothing underneath the doing. That I was my productivity, my achievement, my movement, my output, and without those, I was a vacancy. That's the fear most men I know carry. Different fear for women sometimes, but the same in its shape. We are afraid that underneath the doing there is no being, that if we stop, we disappear. So I sat there that night, and I did not stand up. That was the whole discipline. I did not stand up. I didn't pour a drink. I didn't turn on a screen. I didn't open a book. I just stayed. And what came was exactly what I had been afraid of. First came shame, an ocean of it. Shame for decisions I had made 30 years ago. Shame for things I had said to people I loved. Shame for the father I had not been on nights I could have been, because I was answering emails. Shame for the husband I had been performing as instead of the one I could have been being. Shame piled on shame, and I thought it would drown me. It didn't. Because underneath the shame, after maybe 2 hours, something else came. Grief. Clean grief. For all the years I had lived on the surface of my own life. For the little boy I had been once, who had wanted things that the man had forgotten. For the father who had died 10 years before, who I had never really talked to because I was too busy becoming someone he would approve of. Grief for all the quiet losses a person accumulates by the time they are in their 50s, each one stuffed in a drawer and forgotten because there was no time. And under the grief, after maybe another hour, something stranger came. Love. I know how that sounds. I'm not going to apologize for it. I wept like a child at that kitchen table, with a kind of love I hadn't felt since I was maybe 6 or 7 years old. Love for this life I had been given and not noticed. Love for my wife, who was sleeping upstairs and who I had been in the same house with for decades and had barely been present to. Love for my own self, this strange, broken, trying creature who had been doing his best with what he had. The kind of love that has nothing to do with whether you deserve it. I tell you all of this not to impress you and not to alarm you. I tell you because I want you to understand something. The room is not the enemy. The room feels like the enemy when you are outside of it, trying not to enter. But once you enter, and once you stay, the room is not what you feared. The room is where the layers come off. The room is where your observer finally has enough silence to speak to you. The room is where you meet, maybe for the first time, the person you actually are underneath everything you have been pretending to be. Everyone has to enter the room. Everyone. If you don't enter it now, during the fracture, you'll enter it later, during a worse one. I'd rather you enter it now. Here is what I want to tell you about entering the room. You do not have to do it all in one night. I sat at that kitchen table for maybe 5 hours. Some people sit for 10 minutes a day for a year. Some people sit during their morning walk. Some people sit in a chapel, in a car, on a bench, by a window at dawn. The form doesn't matter. The rule is this. No distractions, no escape hatches, no tasks, just you and whatever comes up, and the commitment not to flee. That's the whole practice. Most people will not do this. Most people, even after a fracture, will find a way back into the noise as fast as they can. A new relationship, a new project, a new obsession. Anything to avoid the room. Don't be most people. The fracture is the one chance life is giving you to become acquainted with yourself. Take it. And when you have taken it, and when you have sat in the room, and when something has shifted in you that you cannot quite name, then something remarkable begins to happen. You begin to turn. There's a moment in every real recovery, and I don't mean recovery from the external circumstances, I mean recovery of the self, where something inside a person reverses direction. Until that moment, they have been falling. After that moment, even though nothing external has changed yet, they are no longer falling. They are landing. The difference between falling and landing is entirely internal, and the moment when falling becomes landing is what I call the turn. The turn doesn't announce itself the way you'd expect. It's not a lightning strike. It's not a breakthrough. It's quieter than that. It's a small, almost embarrassed recognition. One day you wake up and notice that you are no longer at war with what has happened to you. You may still be sad. You may still be scared. You may still be uncertain about everything. But something in you has stopped resisting the fact of the fracture. You have stopped arguing with reality. And the moment you stop arguing with reality, reality stops being your enemy. For me, the turn happened on a walk. Nothing dramatic. I was walking through a park I'd walked through hundreds of times, and I noticed a tree. An ordinary tree. The kind I'd passed every week for years without seeing. And this tree had been through things, you could tell. A big scar on one side where a branch had been torn off, probably in some storm years before. But the tree was not arguing with the scar. The tree was not resentful of the storm. The tree had grown around the wound. The wound was part of the shape of the tree now. And the tree, with its scar, was beautiful. More beautiful than it would have been without it. And I stopped, and I stood there looking at this tree. And I thought, what if my fracture is not something that happened to me? What if my fracture is becoming part of the shape of me? What if the scar is not a deformity, but a signature? That was the turn for me, right there, next to that tree. Here's what I want you to understand about the turn. You do not make it happen by thinking positively. You do not make it happen by telling yourself it's all going to be okay. Those strategies, in my experience, actively delay the turn because they are ways of refusing to face what has happened. The turn only happens when you stop refusing. When you look at the fracture and say, this is real, this happened, this is part of my life now. I am not going to pretend it didn't happen. I am going to let it be part of the shape of me. That's it. That's the whole move. It sounds simple. It is not easy. Everything in our culture trains us to fight reality, to deny, deflect, outrun, outthink, outperform. And so when we say, yes, this is part of me now, it feels like surrender. It feels like weakness. It is not. It is the opposite. It is the strongest thing a human being can do. There is an old idea I want to give you, and I want you to hold it close. The idea is this: what you resist persists. What you accept transforms. I didn't make that up. Better people than me said it long before I was born. But I didn't understand what it meant until my turn. Until I sat with the fact that my company was gone, my finances were wrecked, my identity was in shambles, and I stopped arguing with any of it. The moment I stopped arguing, the thing I could not move began to move. Not because I forced it, because I stopped pulling against it. Life had been trying to carry me somewhere for years, and I had been digging my heels in. When I finally let myself be carried, I discovered that where it wanted to take me was somewhere better than where I had been holding on to. You will know the turn has happened in you by a specific feeling. It is not happiness. It is not relief. It is a kind of quiet, a kind of settled knowing. You will find yourself in the middle of whatever is still hard, noticing that you are no longer being tossed around inside it. You are standing in it. And even though the storm is still happening, you are not the storm. You are the one standing. I want to give you a practice for the turn. It's a sentence, just a sentence. You say it, and you mean it as best you can, even if you only mean it 40%. You can say it out loud or in your head. Here is the sentence. This happened, and I am still here, and I am willing to let it be part of me. That's it. Say it slowly. This happened. I am still here. I am willing to let it be part of me. Not happy about it. Not grateful for it yet. Just willing. Willingness is the doorway. Everything else follows from willingness. If you are willing for your fracture to be part of your life, you begin to integrate it. If you are not willing, you spend the rest of your days locked in combat, something that is never going to leave. And the combat will exhaust you more than the fracture itself ever would have. The turn is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of the rebuilding. But the rebuilding is different than you think it is. You are not going to rebuild the life you had. Get that out of your head. gently. The life you had contained the seeds of the fracture. You do not want that life back. What you want, what you are being invited into, is a new life built on new foundations with the wisdom of the fracture woven into its walls. That is what we are going to build now. And to build it, you need 3 specific disciplines. Let me give them to you. 3 practices. That's what stands between the person who is broken by a fracture and the person who is forged by one. 3 practices, not 20. Not a system, not an app. 3. I am going to give them to you now, and I am going to ask you to take them seriously, because they are the difference between using your fracture and being used by it. The first discipline is distance. By distance, I mean the deliberate cultivation of space between you and your circumstances. Not denial, distance. Denial pretends the circumstances aren't there. Distance sees them clearly and refuses to be swallowed by them. The way you build distance is very practical. Every morning, before you look at your phone, before you check the news, before you let the external world pour itself into your nervous system, you spend a few minutes alone with your observer. 5 minutes is enough. 10 is better. 20 is ideal. In that time, you are not trying to accomplish anything. You are simply locating yourself before the world locates you. Most of us, the moment we open our eyes, hand ourselves over. We reach for the phone. We scroll. And before we have had our first conscious thought, we have absorbed the worries of 10,000 strangers, the anxieties of 3 news cycles, the expectations of every email that arrived overnight. We enter the day already outside of ourselves. Distance is the refusal to do that. Distance is saying, I will meet the world as myself today, not as a shell the world fills up. Practically, the discipline of distance looks like this. You sit somewhere quiet in the morning. You feel your feet on the floor. You feel your breath. You ask yourself one question. What is true for me today? Not what is urgent, not what is expected. What is true? You wait for the answer. It may take days before you hear one. That's fine. The practice isn't the answer. The practice is the waiting. When you wait for yourself daily, you begin to show up for yourself. And a person who shows up for themselves can be shown up for by others. A person who does not show up for themselves cannot be. The second discipline is devotion. And I know that word might make some of you uncomfortable. Good. Let it. Devotion means you give yourself freely and without expectation of return to something larger than your own circumstances. I don't care what it is. It can be a craft. It can be a person. It can be a practice. It can be a cause. It can be a faith if you have one. It can be simple service to people who are in more pain than you are. The content of the devotion does not matter. The fact of the devotion does. Why? Because the one thing that will keep you stuck in your fracture is making your fracture the center of your universe. When your circumstances are the center, everything you feel is magnified. Every setback is catastrophic. Every small disappointment echoes. When something larger than your circumstances is the center, your circumstances become what they actually are, weather. Important, sometimes painful, but not the whole of what is happening. I began my devotion during the year my company failed. I started visiting a hospice once a week, not because I thought it would help me. I started because a friend asked me to go once, and I couldn't think of a reason to say no. I sat with dying strangers. I held their hands. I listened to them talk about their lives. Men who were leaving. Women who knew they had weeks. And a strange thing happened to me. In a room where people were losing everything, I stopped feeling like I had lost everything. I felt like I still had almost all of it. I was still here. I was still walking. I was still able to hold someone's hand. The perspective that devotion gave me saved my life. I am not exaggerating. It saved my life. The third discipline is direction. This is where most modern motivational thinking goes wrong. It tells you to set goals, big goals, audacious goals. I don't believe in that. Not in the middle of a fracture. In the middle of a fracture, you don't need goals. You need a direction. The difference matters. A goal is a destination, and if you set a destination while you are still broken, you will set it from your broken place, and you will aim at something that will break you again. A direction is a quality, a way of moving through your days that is true to who you are becoming. You do not need to know where you are going. You need to know which way is forward. To find your direction, ask yourself this: if I could not fail and I could not be judged, what would I want the next year of my life to feel like? Notice the word feel like, not look like, not accomplish. Feel. Close your eyes and let the feeling come. Peaceful, creative, connected, bold, honest. Whatever the word is, that word is your direction. Every day, every choice, every hour, you ask yourself, does this choice move me in the direction of the feeling or away from it? That's the whole discipline. You do not need to plan 10 years. You need to make this afternoon true. Distance, devotion, direction. Those are the three. Practice them imperfectly for a year, and you will not recognize the person you were when the fracture began. Not because your circumstances will have changed. They may or they may not. But because you will have changed. You will have become the kind of person whose steadiness does not depend on what is happening around them. And once that steadiness is in place, you can begin very slowly to build again. Here's the part most people get wrong, the part where you start again. I've watched too many men and women, after a big fracture, rush back into building as fast as they possibly can. They cannot tolerate the emptiness. They are terrified of the empty lot where their old life used to stand, so they start pouring concrete before they have understood the ground they are pouring it onto. And 3 years later, something cracks again, because they built the new house on the same fault line as the old one. They changed the building. They didn't change the ground. What I'm going to tell you now is the opposite of everything the culture screams at you. The culture says, bounce back. The culture says, be resilient. The culture says, turn your wounds into your comeback story as fast as possible. I disagree strongly. The most important thing you can do after a fracture is not rebuild quickly. It is rebuild slowly. Slowly enough that you are a different person building than the one who built last time. Slowly enough that the foundation is rock, not sand. What does slow rebuilding look like? It looks like this. For the first year after the turn, you do not make any large structural decisions about your life. No new business launches, no new marriages, no new cities, no new identities. You simply live. You practice distance, devotion, and direction. You let your observer settle into the driver's seat. You begin to know yourself. That year is not wasted. That year is the most productive year of your life because during that year the foundation is being laid. I know what some of you are thinking. I don't have a year. My finances won't allow a year. My family won't allow a year. My age won't allow a year. I hear you. I am not asking you to stop working. I am not asking you to stop providing. I am asking you to stop making identity-level decisions for a while. Keep paying the bill. Keep showing up for the people who need you. But don't commit to a new version of yourself until you actually know who the new version is. That is the difference between slow rebuilding and paralysis. You keep moving. You just don't keep committing. After that first year, something begins to rise up in you. It rises up on its own. You do not force it. It is a clarity about what you want to build next, and more importantly, why. The why is what matters. In my old life, almost everything I built because I was running from something, running from shame, running from my father's disapproval, running from a fear that if I stopped, I'd disappear. In my new life, after the rebuilding, almost everything I build because I am walking towards something, walking toward contribution, walking toward connection, walking toward the version of myself that I actually want to be when I die. The difference between those two motivations cannot be overstated. Everything in a life driven by running is exhausting. Everything in a life driven by walking toward is sustaining. Here's what I built in the 5 years after my collapse. I built a small practice helping men and women who were in the middle of fractures the way I had been. Nothing large, nothing famous. A few dozen people a year. I built a marriage that actually looked like a marriage instead of a roommate situation between two tired people. I built a relationship with my son that let him see me for the first time as a human being and not a role. I built, most importantly, a self I could live inside without exhausting myself. And when I compare that self to the self I was before the fracture, it isn't close. The man I am now is bigger, quieter, stronger, kinder, freer. He has nothing the old man had, and he would not trade places with the old man for any amount of money on earth. That's the promise I want to make you, as much as any human being can promise another. If you will go through the fracture honestly, if you will sit in the room, if you will let the turn happen, if you will practice the 3 disciplines, and if you will rebuild slowly, the self on the other side will be a self worth being. I cannot tell you what that self will look like. I cannot tell you what he or she will do. I can tell you they will be real in a way you have never been real. And realness is the one thing that cannot be taken from you. Circumstances can always be taken. Realness cannot. Look at the people around you, the ones you admire most, the ones who have a quality of settledness about them, a kind of quiet authority that has nothing to do with their titles. I promise you, every one of them has been through at least one fracture in their lives. Every one. There is no shortcut to that quality. You cannot read it into yourself. You cannot course it into yourself. You cannot hack it into yourself. It is earned in the room, in the silence, in the slow rebuild. It is the only authority in life that cannot be faked. You have been given, and I know it does not feel like a gift yet, the raw material for that quality. Your fracture is the soil. Whether something grows out of that soil is up to you. But the soil is rich. It is the richest soil life gives. Nothing grows in this life without breaking. The seed has to break to become the plant. The egg has to break to become the bird. You are not exempt from that law. No one is. And the breaking, as much as it hurts, is what makes the becoming possible. Some of you listening are still in the thick of it. I want to speak to you now directly. You in the middle. You, right now, listening to this with something heavy sitting on your chest. You who have not told anyone how bad it has gotten. You who have been putting on the face every morning because you have children watching, or employees waiting, or a spouse whose own worries already feel like more than you can hold. You who feel like you are drowning slowly in a room where everyone thinks you're fine. I want to speak to you for a little while, not to the rest of the audience, to you. Here is what I want you to know. First, you are not alone. I know that sentence gets used too often, and I know it can feel small when you hear it. But I am not saying it as a comfort. I am saying it as a fact. Every single person I have ever sat with, in the middle of their fracture, believed they were uniquely alone inside of it. Every single one. And every single one of them was wrong. There is a whole company of people walking through what you are walking through right now in this exact moment. Most of them are wearing the same face you are wearing. You would be astonished if you could see them for who they actually are. The weight you are carrying is not a unique deformity. It is part of being a human being at a certain threshold of life. You are not broken, you are crossing. Second thing I want you to know, the weight you are carrying is not permanent. I am not telling you it will vanish tomorrow. I am telling you, as someone who has been flattened by it myself, that it transforms. That what feels unbearable in month 3 feels simply painful by month 9, and survivable by month 18, and in some strange way meaningful by year 3. I know you cannot feel that from where you are standing. I could not feel it either when I was there, but it is true. The weight changes, you change underneath it. And one day, without you noticing the exact moment, you are able to stand up without it being the whole story of who you are. Third thing, you are allowed to ask for help. I know what runs through your head when someone says that. You think, I should be able to handle this. People who are real men handle it. People who are real mothers handle it. People who are leaders handle it. I am here to tell you that no one handles this alone. Every person who has come out of a fracture with anything resembling their humanity intact had help. A friend, a professional, a stranger, a group, a faith, something. The people who try to do it alone do not become stronger. They become harder. And hardness is not strength. Hardness is the crust that forms over an unhealed wound. It keeps the pain out, but it also keeps love out. You do not want hardness. You want healing. And healing requires a witness. Find your witness. It may be a therapist. It may be a close friend you have never fully let in. It may be a support group of people who are walking through the same thing. It may be a pastor, a rabbi, a sponsor, a coach. It does not need to be perfect. It needs to be real. Tell one other human being out loud the truth of what is happening inside of you. I promise you, the moment you do, the weight shifts. Not because the circumstances change. Because carrying something alone is an entirely different thing from carrying it with one other person. The load stays the same. The structure changes. And the structure is what breaks people, not the load. Fourth thing, you do not have to have it figured out. You do not have to know what is next. You do not have to have a 5-year plan. You do not have to be productive during this time. You have permission. You have always had permission, and I am only reminding you to simply survive this chapter. That is enough. Surviving is not a failure of ambition. Surviving in certain seasons is the whole of what a human life is asked to do. And you are doing, even when you don't feel like you are. The fact that you are still here means you are. Fifth thing, and this is the most important. The self that is coming out of this on the other side is worth meeting. You have not met that self yet. You cannot from where you are standing. But I have met that self in dozens and dozens of men and women who have come out of their own fractures. That self is quieter than the one you used to be. That self is less impressed by nonsense. That self is more tender with people who are hurting. That self laughs more easily and cries more easily. That self has a kind of freedom that the old self did not even know was possible. You are becoming that self, even now, even while you cannot feel it. The becoming is happening underneath the pain. The pain is the chisel. The self is the sculpture. Stay. That's what I want to say to you. Stay. However bad it is, however dark, however uncertain, stay. The world does not lose anything when you leave it except you, and you are exactly what it needs. Not the productive you, not the accomplished you. You. The breathing, trying, breaking, rebuilding you. Stay long enough to meet the self that is forming. You will not regret meeting that self. No one ever does. One more section. This last one, I want to speak to all of you again, not just the ones in the middle. Because I want to end with what I believe, after everything I have seen, is the most important thing a human being can know about their own life. Everything I have said to you today comes down to one sentence. Listen carefully. Your external environment is not who you are. It has never been. It was never going to be. The fracture was not your life ending. The fracture was your life finally becoming honest with you about what it always was. You are not your job. You were not even when the job was going well. You are not your marriage. You were not even when it was thriving. You are not your body's current state. You are not your bank account. You are not your reputation. You are not your title. You are not your house. You are not the collection of roles that other people have been clapping for. Those were the weather. You are the sky. The observer protocol is not a philosophy I made up. It is a way of remembering what you already are underneath the decades of performance. You came into this world as the observer. You fell asleep into the roles because the world is organized to put you to sleep. The fracture woke you up. That is what fractures do. They wake you. And the question now is not whether you will go back to sleep. The question is, how deep will the wakefulness go? I want you to hear me promise you something. Every crack in your external environment, every loss, every fracture, every ending, every single one is an invitation into a deeper wakefulness. There is no exception to that rule. The cracks are not punishments. They are doorways. Some of you are standing in front of a doorway right now, and you have been standing in front of it for months, terrified to step through. Not because the other side will be easier. It will not. But because on the other side is a version of you that is larger than the version you are being asked to leave behind. You get one of these lives. One. I do not know what you believe about what comes after, and I am not going to lecture you on that. I believe certain things, you believe certain things, but what we can both agree on is that you get one shot at this particular chapter of your consciousness in this particular body on this particular side of the river. Do not waste it mourning a version of yourself that was never going to hold you. Do not waste it being angry at a world that was never going to be stable. Do not waste it resenting a fracture that was, whether you know it yet or not, the kindest thing life has ever done for you. Practice distance. 10 minutes in the morning. No phone. Just you and your observer. Practice devotion. Give yourself to something outside your circumstances. Practice direction. Ask yourself the feeling you want your next year to have and walk toward it. Sit in the room. Take the turn. Rebuild slowly. Find your witness. Become real. And when the next fracture comes, and it will because you are alive and everything that lives is eventually broken open, you will meet it differently than you met this one. You will not be surprised by it. You will not be destroyed by it. You will recognize it. You will say, "Oh, you again, come in. I know how to do this now." That is the freedom. That is the whole of the protocol. That is why you went through what you went through, not because the universe is cruel. Because the universe is trying to grow you into a human being who can no longer be broken by what breaks him. And the only way it knows how to grow that person is by breaking the smaller person first. You are bigger than your fracture. You were always bigger than your fracture. The fracture is what lets you know how big you are. Without it, you would have gone on mistaking the scaffolding for the building for the rest of your life. Go now. Back into your days. Back into your rooms, your jobs, your marriages, your uncertainties, your fears. Take what I have given you or leave it. That is up to you. But know that I meant every word. Know that an old man who went through his own fracture and came out the other side is rooting for you. Know that the observer inside of you is waiting patiently, however long it takes, for you to turn toward it and say, I am here. I am finally here. That is the whole spiritual work of a human life. To finally, after all the decades of performing, turn toward yourself and say, I am here. Everything that needs to happen after that will happen. Everything. You do not have to figure it out. You have to show up. Show up, my friend. Show up for your own light. Show up for the observer that is watching from behind your eyes right now. Show up for the self that is being formed, even as we speak, inside the fracture. Show up for the one breath you are taking in this one moment, which is the only life you have ever truly had. The protocol lives in you. It always has. It always will. Go build a life that knows it.